Back to the channel. Welcome back to Sunday Morning Live. This is my weekly live stream that I do here on Facebook and on YouTube. It's content that I've been the most consistent with. Lately, it's been a busy, crazy week. I'm getting started a little bit late. Tired. I suppose it's been productive, even though it's been busy. I'm just going to check and make sure I am actually streaming, because I have had some issues in the group, and I don't know why. And I'm still having issues in the group. So odd. I was just thinking back to the early pandemic days when you had to make a choice, like which church service were you going to watch that was streaming live? Or you'd go back and, you'd watch one, maybe the church you were attending before, and then you'd go back and watch some others. But anyway, it's an interesting time, wasn't it? I think I just saw something on here. Anyway, I'll have to mess with that some more. I hope everybody's doing well. I want to talk about something today that sounds pretty simple, pretty basic. And for a lot of you, you probably already kind of know how you think about this. You know what your, one second. You know what your thoughts are on this. And that is there a plan? In other words, is there a plan for our lives? I remember one of the first things that I had to do when I got into a discipleship program in a church was memorize what was called the 4 spiritual laws. And of course, that was my first exposure to the plan of salvation anyway, because I was really exposed to a lot of Campus Crusade for Christ and Bill Bright stuff. And so they had come up, I think it was Bill Bright that came up originally with what he called the 4 spiritual laws. And I had to memorize those and memorize all the scriptures and be able to give the plan of salvation to somebody. And I don't even know if I can remember them now. But basically, the way they'd lay out the plan of salvation is God has a wonderful plan for your life. That was the first law. God has a wonderful plan for your life. And then the second law was you screwed it up. You effed it up by sinning, and that sin separates you from God. And then the third spiritual law is that, God loved the world so much, he gave his son, that Jesus died for your sins. And then the fourth spiritual law was you had to accept that gift in order to be saved. But something that really spoke to me as a young person was that initial idea that God had a wonderful plan for my life. And I really embraced that and believed that and have believed that for a long time. It's kept me going through a lot of difficult times. There was one point right before I got into that church where I got into that discipleship program where I was just very depressed. It was very difficult for me to feel motivated or inspired. I didn't know what to do with my life. 20, 21 years old, gone through some family tragedy, and just it felt like the end of the world to me. And I kept seeing the Bible verse that was Jeremiah 29:11 in the New International Version. And in the New International Version, Jeremiah 29:11 says, I know the plans that I have for you, says the Lord, plans to prosper you and not to harm you, to give you a future and a hope. To give you a future and a hope. And I kept seeing that. And then that's like, because I kept seeing that, it was just confirmation to me that God had a plan for my life. And then that led to me surrendering to God's plan. So in the 4 spiritual laws, it doesn't make a lot of sense, because the first law is God has a wonderful plan for your life. The second law is you effed it up, you screwed it up. Third law is Jesus died for you. Fourth law is you have to accept it. And then the end result is that you're saved and you go to heaven. You gain heaven and miss hell. there's not really anything else about finding and following the plan of God for your life. So that was really foundational for me, was like, God has a plan for me, and I want to find that plan, because that plan is for my best. It's to prosper me. It's to give me a future. It's to give me a hope. And so my sense of surrender to the Lordship of Christ back then, my sense of surrender to my idea of following Jesus, and the thing I preached for 30 years was, that the thief comes to steal, kill, and destroy, but Jesus said, I have come that you might have life and that you might have it more abundantly. God has a plan for you, a plan to prosper you, not to harm you, to give you a future and a hope. So it wasn't difficult for me then, was not a difficult transition for me then to get into what's known as the Word of Faith movement or the prosperity gospel, that kind of thing, because to me, the idea that God wanted to prosper me was deeply embedded into my consciousness and into my psyche. And my obedience then, my submission to the will of God, was primarily self-serving, in the sense that I wanted to get to that prosperity. In other words, I can't see what's coming down the road. I can't see what's next. I can't see the dangers. I can't see the blessings, but God can. And as long as I follow what's written in the book, or later on, much later, it was like, as long as I'm being led by the Holy Spirit, then as long as I'm getting that guidance and I'm listening to it and I'm taking those steps and I'm moving those directions, then everything's going to work out fine. And of course, taught that to other people as well. The problem is that everything didn't always work out fine. And for a lot of people, they would say, I was in the will of God, in the plan of God, following the plan of God, and these terrible tragedies happened. How could that be part of God's plan to give me a future and a hope and to prosper me, et cetera, and so on? I grabbed a coffee cup where the stuff is wearing off. It used to be a church. It's interesting. This used to be have our church logo, or a church saying, which I think was "Awaken to a New Day," and then the church logo is right there, and that's what's left of it. But anyway, I digress. So what I'm trying to say is that was really foundational and fundamental to my life, my sense of who Christ was, who I was, following God, following the plan of God, all that kind of stuff. And then, of course, that has the built-in presupposition that if some kind of terrible tragedy does happen to you or to me, then that somehow we missed out on the plan, or we missed out on the plan of God. So let's play this like this is a zero-sum game, or like this is a either-or situation. So if there is a creator, a source, a God, the divine, and that being does love us, that being does care about us, both on a macro level and on a micro level, both corporately and individually, then it would make sense that that being has a plan for our lives, has a plan for humanity, right? That there's some kind of guidance, there's some kind of orchestration, there's some kind of oversight to life, to humanity, etc. If we go the other direction and we say there is no God, there is no source, there is no creator, and if there is a God, if there is a creator, and if there is a source, he doesn't care about humanity. If he cared about humanity, children wouldn't be suffering, wars wouldn't be happening, families wouldn't be going through horrible. There's so much suffering in the world on a macro level, and then whatever we're going through in our lives, there can be varying degrees of suffering on the micro level too, right? So if there is a God, doesn't give a crap, therefore there is no plan. Now, if there is no plan, there can be a lot of freedom in that, because there's nothing that I have to find from someone else that I have to submit to or surrender to or follow or worry about deviating from, because if I deviate from it, then I'm not going to be blessed, or I'm not going to prosper. In other words, it's irrelevant. Finding this plan is completely irrelevant because there isn't a plan. Number one. Also, then everything about my life, both on the micro level, again, individually, and the macro level with humanity in general, is completely and totally random. It's just a random sequence of events. There is no order. There is no organization. There's no guidance. There's no one that can look down the road and look ahead, and no signs that I can have, like when you're driving, that says sharp curve coming up, or, a deer crossing. We have a lot of those signs here, or a school zone or construction zone, because it's all just random. There is no way to anticipate, intuit the future. And there you go. Also, if this other scenario is true, that there is no God, there is no plan, there is no consciousness guiding, there is no orchestration, then there's no oversight either. There's no accountability. There's no intervention even possible in our lives. So there's not even a hope of intervention outside yourself. And we are very limited as human beings. We get full of ourselves. We can be very arrogant and full of bravado, not really deal with reality. There are a lot of subjects that are reality that we don't deal with. In fact, human beings not only have a hard time dealing with reality, if theories of people like Dr. Donald Hoffman, for example, are true, which I think his theory is very solid, I would say very probable, statistically, mathematically. He says we don't engage with reality at all. He says if we engage in reality at all, we won't survive as a species. And he's talking about our actual physical sense perceptions, that nothing is what it appears, that evolution has modified our senses and modified our perceptions in such a way that we don't engage reality, we engage for benefit. Now, if we're engaging for benefit at the level of sensory perception, then we're certainly engaging for benefit at the level of anything that we think or feel, which is why almost nobody can really be objective or get around their confirmation biases and self-serving biases and things like that. So I'm saying all that to say that we're not very humble. And we think we're right, and we argue and all this stuff, when in reality, we don't engage reality at all. Or it's very, very difficult for us as human beings to engage with reality, and very difficult, if we're arrogant, to admit that we're being guided by our confirmation biases and our preferences all the time. And very difficult to own those things. So from that perspective, then, it's very difficult for us to engage reality. It's therefore very difficult for us to talk about certain topics and certain subjects. Death would be one of those, but also just the uncertainty of life, the difficulties of life, the possibilities for tragedy, the possibilities for hardship, the possibilities for difficulty, dealing with a difficult ongoing situation or problem in your life. If there is no God, no divine, no consciousness, no plan, no orchestration, and no oversight, there's also no intervention. So you're on your own. You're here on the planet and you're on your own. Something happens with one of your children. You and they are limited to whatever resources are there. Something going on in the world. In other words, there's no one to pray to. There's no sense of anything. And that can be a terrifying proposition as well. There's no safety bubble, in other words. And again, there's no intuiting the future, nothing like that. And so therefore we really are like, I think it's a Chinese proverb, that life is like going down a winding river in a raft going backwards, because you can only see where you've been. You can't see what's coming up. So both have their advantages, right? If the one is true, that there is a guiding intelligence, a guiding force, the divine, God's plan for our lives, then there is that security and certainty that comes from that. If we can get security and certainty that we're actually following that plan, and therein lies the rub. If there is no God, then there is no plan, there is no order, everything's random, there is no intervention, there is no orchestration. That kind of is the rub. And the blessing, for lack of a better word, I know it's a weird word to use in that context, but the benefit that comes from that is I have total freedom. I don't have to find a plan. I don't have to worry about finding a plan or following a plan or adhering to a plan, that kind of thing. Sorry, just checking. Is that making sense to you? Not seeing comments again, so I don't know if nobody's on or if I'm just not able to see them. I don't know what that's about. I'll have to play with it, figure it out. I used to be able to see comments, or maybe nobody's commenting. I don't know. I know I've been showing more views than other videos. So anyway, what's the plan? So, but let's step back and look at this from some other perspectives, because there's also this idea that we had some level of pre-existence as souls. A lot of people teach this that are spiritual teachers, many of them friends of mine, that we collectively, as part of a soul group, chose our lives, that we were the ones that orchestrated our path, that we chose the events and experiences that we would choose to have, that we would have in this life, and that we agreed to those before we incarnated. And there are various different variations and nuances of this that we collectively chose as a soul group, that we travel through our lifetimes, reincarnating over and over again with certain people who are part of what we would call our soul groups. And we decide what roles we're going to play in each other's life. This life, I'm going to be this for you, and you're going to do this for me. And this gets, I've heard this a lot. I've heard people say, in this life, I want to find out what it feels like to be a victim in this area. Or I want to experience what it feels like to victimize a person in this area. Don't want to be graphic because I don't want the video to get flagged. And it will if I use the terminology that I've heard people use. So we agree, okay, last life, you victimized me and you were the perpetrator, and I got to experience what that felt like. So this life, I get to be the perpetrator, you get to be the victim. And we set all of these things up. And so therefore, if we experience negativity in our lives, then we chose it. We chose that negativity. I hear that a lot. I see a comment. Again, I can't always see the names, but someone says NDEs talk about this often. Seems masochistic, but I'm sure paradigms are quite different on the other side. Yeah, that's the Thank you for bringing that out. That's the way that is approached. Now, a couple problems with that. Like, none of these scenarios are bulletproof, in my opinion, because the problem with that is, first off, how many people are involved in this soul group? How many people are involved in this planning that we're doing? And if we're planning this ahead of time, it implies several things. Number one, it implies that we chose to experience these tragedies and hardships in our life. Number two, it implies that we have control, that we have an intelligence that's guiding things, that also has enough control to make sure that circumstances line up in such a way that these events take place. So if we agreed to victimize each other, let's say, that's the one that they use a lot, then we have to have a lot of elements that we control, almost down to a micromanagement level, to make sure that our paths cross in the right set of circumstances with the right opportunity to make sure that what we planned ahead of time, the victim perpetrator thing, comes to pass. Gosh, I hope YouTube, man. I'm just wondering how it's interpreting my script right here, and how this is gonna, if this video is gonna get taken down. So it implies not only planning. I mean, it's one thing to plan. Think about it. As human beings, we can plan for lots of stuff. Lots of businesses fail, lots of marriages fail, lots of families fail. It's not always, lots of organizations fail, lots of candidates fail. It's not always due to a lack of planning or poor planning. Sometimes even the best plans fail, right? Because there's so many things that would have to be controlled down to a micromanaging level, if that's the case. So where does that power come from? Where does that consciousness, is it a collective corporate consciousness that's orchestrating and planning that stuff? And if that's the case, a lot of these same groups teach law of attraction as well. Can I change my fate? Can I change my mind on a soul contract that was made? And if that changed my mind on that soul contract, what if the other person doesn't change their mind? And how do I let the other person know? Is this all going on at a subconsciously telepathic level? So, and I get, people that are really committed to that point of view. And I'm not saying it's wrong. I'm just talking through all these various different scenarios, asking the question, is there a plan? So please don't get upset with me. I'm just saying, if you think through it critically, here are some factors that have to be thought about. The meticulous micromanaging control of the soul group in order for each person to experience what they came here to experience. Where does the law of attraction fit in with that? Can you change those soul contracts while you're at it? And how does that happen? Because I know I'll hear people say all the time, yeah, you can change it. You don't have to fulfill it. You have free will. Do I have free will at all? If any scenario involving a plan is out there. The other problem with that is it can lead to, at least initially, in this 3D experience, in this physical experience that we're living and engaging with, it's an awful lot like victim blaming. It's an awful lot like telling someone that they were a victim that they chose to be a victim. In fact, it's not an awful lot like it. It is what it is. By definition, that's what it is. So we're engaging in a spiritual level of victim blaming when we do that. Absolutely. I mean, now, some people will find comfort in that and say, well, I chose this experience, so it's expanding me, expanding my consciousness, it's growing me. It's no different than a religious person who says that God uses suffering to teach you or to perfect you. It's the exact same doctrine. That God put you through something negative or something painful or something difficult in order to expand you or grow you. It's the same thing. You're just saying you put yourself through it now. You chose it. You put yourself through it now for the same purpose. That can become very problematic for people who are suffering from deep levels of trauma. That can become even more problematic for people who have genuinely been victims of abuse. I know this firsthand because I work with a lot of people like that in my practice. The shame is so deep in these abusive situations that I don't know if I've ever worked with a victim that didn't question on some level if they were to blame, just on the natural 3D plane. Am I to blame for this event that happened to me? What did I do? What signals did I get off that I was the one chosen to be victimized in this way, whereas other people around me were not chosen? So if we come along just because it's helpful for us, maybe, to say, well, I went through all this crap because I chose it, and that makes me feel good because there's some purpose to it that's expanding me. And then I think if I share that with these people, they're going to feel the same way. And that's absolutely not the truth. In fact, it can make their suffering and their situation worse. That's just a fact. And also, how does suffering expand us? How does it grow us? And what does it expand us into? And what does it grow us into? Oh, I just wanted to have that experience, so now I can put that experience collectively in my higher self with my other experiences from all my other selves. And that grows and expands my higher self and my consciousness. That sounds really good, but if you think about it, that's a lot of fluff that I just said there. That's using a lot of spiritual type language it's almost hypnotic in the sense that it doesn't connect to anything practical or applicable. It just sounds good. It's just like, God won't give you anything you can't handle. God won't take you through anything you can't bear, which is a misquoting of a scripture in 2 Corinthians. It's just a bunch of spiritual sounding stuff, but it doesn't really connect to anything tangible or practical. All right, so those are some options, right? Door number 1, God has a plan for your life. We F it up when we sin. Door number 2, there is no God, there is no plan. That gives me total freedom, but there's also total randomness, no accountability, no oversight, and no intervention. But there is freedom to a degree that you have free will. And by that, I mean that you aren't controlled by patterns and programmings of the culture and your experiences and your interpretations. So it's still a limited amount of freedom. And then door number 3 is we collectively chose this as a soul group, or we chose this as souls before we came down here. Those are 3 of the options that are the most prevalent. I'm sure there's others out there. Another one would be karma, right? That whatever we experienced or did wrong or bad in our past life, we have to live out that karma in the next life. So if I'm a victim in this life it probably means somewhere I victimized someone else. And so this is my karma. And there's lots of nuances to karma. Working out our karma, changing our karma, having good karma, bad karma, all that stuff. That also to me seems rather random, not like there's much of a plan to it. So I guess that is some version somewhere in between there. But again, that's more of an Eastern concept. And as you've heard me say, if you've watched me before, I don't engage a lot with Eastern thought because I don't talk a lot about Eastern thought because I don't engage with it a lot. And I'm certainly very much a novice, if I could even call myself a novice, when it comes to Eastern philosophies. So let's break this down. Is there a plan? Is there an orchestration? I'm going to give you my thoughts on it, and I'd love to hear your thoughts. I think it's very self-evident in nature that there is a guiding intelligence and a plan. For the last 4 years, I've had the same birds show up at my house around February, start building their nest underneath my porch, lay their eggs, feed their babies, kick their babies out of the nest, fly south for the winter, wherever they go, and come back the next February. They have some kind of internal guidance system that tells them this is what they need to do. Of course, evolution has a lot to do with this. The cells in our body, the systems, the way they work in our body, there is intelligence guiding those things. In other words, they follow a plan. The bird is following a plan. When grass grows, it's following a plan. In other words, because I believe that consciousness is primary, fundamental, base reality, then we see the evidence of that consciousness in the fact that there is intelligence, there is design, there is intelligent design in every facet of nature. Now, the atheist will come back and say, that's just evolution. That's just the way things evolve so that we could survive. I would come back and say, yeah, but why? Why would we even need to survive? Why would survival even be a thing at all if everything in the universe was just random? I find that those propositions completely incredulous. They're just completely incredulous to me. Now, like I said before, we have a hard time engaging in reality. We all have our biases, preferences, and I certainly have mine. And I realize that that influences the way I think about this stuff. And I can own that with no problem. Back to what I was saying. Therefore, I do believe now, so on the natural level, the plane of nature, I do see a plan. I do see organization. That's the other thing. If there's no plan, there's no organization. So I do see those things. On a personal level, in my own personal life, I have experienced guidance that has told me ahead of time what's going to happen and the action that I need to take in order to be prepared for what's about to come. I have had that happen a lot. Lots of people have. Lots of people have had premonitions and guidance at various crucial points in their life that they can point to and say, I was guided here or guided there. And I'm talking about really intuiting the future. In other words, I know what's going to happen. Therefore, this is the action that I need to take. And then I take that action to avoid what was going to happen. And those events came to pass. And because I took a certain action, I had safety when those events happened. Lots of people have experienced that. I've experienced that quite a few times in my own life. Something's guiding that. Something's orchestrating that. It's not just a human potential or ability that just slips in every once in a while, because it happened at such crucial moments. Synchronicities, events lining up and happening in such with such synchronicity that it was evident to me that there was order and timing and plan and orchestration. So there's those things as well. On a macro level, yes, humanity has gone through a lot of horrible things. Lots of people have suffered horribly, and I don't have the answers to all of that, why that is, how that is. And yet, it would seem at least that we are still progressing, that we're still moving forward, that while there is a lot of problems still to solve, life is much easier for us. Life is on a macro level with, whether we want to admit it or not, there's less starvation, there's less people dying in wars. There is, you can go down through the list. This is what cracks me up with all these end time people, because they're like, oh, Jesus said there'd be wars and there'd be famine and there'd be pestilence and there'd be disease. And look at, this pandemic and this disease and wherever you stand with all that stuff. But realize, just walking through, we went to the cemetery last Memorial Day, and just walking through and looking at, it's an older cemetery, and looking at how many babies were buried there in the late 1800s, early 1900s, because there were so many diseases that we can treat now, that people don't have to die from if they have access to medical care. And while those systems are broken, more people have access to that type of stuff today. I know there are places in the world that don't, where that's still a reality for you. And I'm not being insensitive to that. But again, I'm looking at this from a macro perspective, meaning the entire world. So, and there are statistics out there that bears this out. Yeah, there are places where there's still famine. Yeah, there are places where people are still dying in wars. Yeah, there are places where people can't get simple antibiotics to treat diseases that could be treated, and they're dying from those things. Yes, those things are happening. But when you look at the global statistics on those things, they've gone way down. They're trending down. So I think from that perspective, you can make an argument that on a macro level, things are moving and improving, moving forward and improving and progressing. So just laying out some reasons why I think there is a plan, there is orchestration. I think you see it in nature. I've seen it. Many people have in synchronicities, intuitions, being able to intuit a future, see the future before it happens, plan accordingly. And then on a macro level, I think humanity is moving forward more. So I guess I land somewhere in here with it. I'll just share my personal thoughts with you, and then I'd love to hear yours. I do believe in God. I do believe in creator, source, divine. I do believe in intelligent design. I do believe there is a ultimate plan and purpose for humanity. I don't believe that we're there yet. I do believe in autonomy. So I do believe on some level that there were people that we contracted with soul contracts that we are connected to because of past lives, because of karmic connections, however you want to think about that. I do believe in that because I do believe in freedom. And I think that balancing freedom and love is part of what we're here to do as human beings, finding that balance, holding it in tension. So I do believe that. And I do believe there are certain things. So I would say in cooperation with God or the divine. In other words, I don't think God just plans something out for us and you're screwed if you don't hit it. And also, I don't believe that that plan has anything to do with what we do for a living, who we marry, stuff like that. I don't believe in that kind of micromanagement on any level. I don't believe that God has is in meticulous control and micromanaging every detail of our lives, even the big ones, even the ones that are big to us, not being micromanaged. Nor do I believe that we as a soul group or that me as a soul can micromanage, i.e., control everything that happens in this simulation, in this physical life that we're living. So I do believe there are certain big things that can be worked out or planned or contracted or agreed upon. So there is a overarching plan without meticulous micromanagement and control over that plan. Now, when there is no meticulous management or meticulous control and micromanaging of what happens here, then we are here, which this is the other thing, going back to the plan that this idea that everything we suffer, we chose and we planned. What about the other billions of people on the planet? Like, they could really mess with that. Like, if we're all equal in that sense and we're all choosing, how does that all come together? It doesn't make sense. So what if it's this way? What if there is guidance? What if there is a overarching plan, but there is no meticulous control and micromanaging? So that would mean then that in order for me to experience certain aspects of this plan, I could periodically, maybe 5 or 6 times in my life, maybe more than that, I'm just pulling that number out of the air, have some type of divine intervention that puts me on the path that I need to be on, that moves me in the direction that I need to go. And that's why we experience those things. It's not just, a flash of human potential that hasn't fully awakened yet, that just happens to come up at this one particular time in this random mess of a universe that we live in. No, there's guidance. There's an overarching plan. I need to be on the path. And if I don't meet this person at this particular time, or if this event doesn't occur in my life, or whatever the synchronicity is, it shows up only periodically to keep me moving in the direction that I need to move because it's not being micromanaged. That would also mean then that I can experience a hell of a lot of suffering that isn't part of the plan. Again, because there is no meticulous control and micromanagement of everything that's going on in life, which is why it's so unfair to say to somebody who was victimized in some way in their lives, you chose this. You don't know that they chose that. And like the one comment that showed up, like my friend said here, NDEs talk about this often, seems masochistic, but I'm sure paradigms are quite different on the other side. Do they really? See, here's what I'm saying. We can fill in the blanks there. We can have an NDE or someone has an NDE and they get this awareness of choice and purpose and their involvement in planning. Then they fill in the blanks. Oh, we chose our lives, or I suffered this thing because I chose it, and I'm being shown that in an NDE. And then we come down and we fill in the blanks with these assumptions of, again, I'm going to say it again, meticulous control and micromanaging. And then we try to thrust those ideas onto other people when in fact it could very well be, and probably is true, that some things that are bad just happen by chance. Some things that are bad happen because somebody chose something different than what they agreed to, i.e., someone does something very harmful to themselves or someone else that then brings suffering to a lot of other people. And so our suffering then can be a result of the randomness of this experience. And that might be part of the plan. The randomness of the experience might be part of the plan. Part of the plan is we're going to put you in this dangerous situation where you're going to suffer. And that suffering is just a result of randomness, and it doesn't have some overarching, amazing purpose for you, other than maybe we're just learning to experience suffering so that by contrast, we can know what pleasure is. Or we learn something from how to transcend suffering. So the plan isn't the suffering itself, maybe it's transcendence. So I'm just throwing out ideas and ways to think about this stuff. Again, I'm curious how you guys think about it. Again, I just think it's very interesting to consider. I'm just going to look because I'm not seeing comments. Yeah, not very many. My friend Joe says we experience polarity on an egalitarian basis as we are creative consciousness experiencing all potential. We are all dissociative personalities of the one. Yeah, you said a lot there, Joe. How about the paradox that we are one and several at the same time? Yeah. Love is meaningless without hate. Pain is meaningless without pleasure. Joy is meaningless without sorrow. I'm not convinced of soul contracts, but I do believe in soulmates and twin flames. Yeah. All right. So thanks everybody for watching. Maybe not the most inspiring or helpful video that I've done, but it's what I felt like I should put out there. Again, please share if you're watching this later in the comments, because I'd love to hear your thoughts and engage with you around these topics. So anyway, thanks for joining Sunday Morning Live. Again, if you appreciate the work that we're doing, in the description is a link to our PayPal page, and you can make a donation. Appreciate everybody that has made donations. Some of you making monthly donations. I really appreciate that. Every little bit helps us. And God bless you. And I will see you next time.